Hi, George Reed here with Medical Holdings. We manufacture the VibraPep oscillatory PEP therapy device under the Curiplex brand for Trianum. What we're going to do today in this video presentation is talk about the device, the technology behind the device, why it's different from any other device on the market, and then give you the tools so that you can go and speak coherently about the device and about how it affects patient outcomes against any other device. So we've got a paper that was published from the University of Chicago. We have some tools that we built for our presentation we made at the AARC meeting last year, which was very well received, and you may have seen this at the national sales meeting. We're going to go through that and give you the tools you need to be successful selling the VibraPep to your customers. So the VibraPep is completely different technology. We're the only non-mechanical device in the OPEP market. And with non-mechanical, what I mean is that if you take the device apart and you look at the way our technology operates, it is a silicone flow tube, and when the patient blows into the device, that air bubble goes through the tube and is not lost. No flow is lost to any mechanical, any mechanism that's operating or leaking around it. So all of that patient effort is converted into therapy. When you take the valve and initially the patient's blowing through, if we put it inside its housing, line that up, drop that in there. In position number 1, you can see that the valve is laying flat inside the tube. As we rotate this therapy selector across the 5 different positions, that valve is now turned sideways inside the tube. What that allows us to do is change the way the waveform behaves when that patient is blowing on the device. The other devices on the market that we just talked about cannot change the way their waveform behaves. They can change the pressure the device returns to the patient, but they cannot change their waveform. So the VibraPep is very unique in that we're the only device that allows you to manipulate and fine-tune that waveform. The VibraPep is unique for 2 distinct reasons. The first is that we employ technology that is non-mechanical. All the other devices on the market use some type of mechanism that a patient has to activate. And the second is that our device, because we use the silicone flow tube, we can actually change the way the waveform is presented to the patient for either a dry lung or a wet lung. We're the only device that can fine-tune the therapy to the patient. The VibraPep technology using the silicone flow valve is the only device on the market that allows the clinician to fine-tune the device or therapy to the patient lung. A patient who may have a drier lung that simply needs additional positive expiratory pressure can use our device in position 1, 2, or 3 in what we call combined PEP. We have a higher level of positive expiratory pressure and we're combining oscillations because the valve is sitting flat in the flow tube. Now when you turn the therapy selector to the position 3, 4, or 5, you see that it turns that valve sideways, and what happens is when that air bubble goes through the valve, it meets with additional resistance, and the resulting waveform that's returned to the patient is what we call dynamic PEP. Dynamic mean that it's different, it changes. It's characterized by a slow upward moving pressure, and then it drops back down to 0. What happens if you think of what's going on in the lung with these secretions, the change in the pressures that are being exerted onto the wall of the secretion, they can't follow that dynamic PEP and are more easily shed from the bronchial wall. So the AARC clinical guidelines for PEP therapy says that we should have that patient blow on a device that creates a positive expiratory pressure, we want them to hold the pressure between 10 and 20 centimeters of water pressure for a period of 3 to 4 seconds. Technically, they call out an IE ratio of 1 to 3, 1 to 4. It works out to about 3 to 4 seconds. So if you think of the lung capacity required to blow through a device and hold that pressure, that's a long time and it's a lot of lung function. Many patients that are compromised just don't have the lung capacity to blow that long. And so the VibraPEP, because we convert the majority of that patient effort into therapy, meaning that we're not mechanical and we don't have a lot of leaking going on, we can take that precious lung function, if you will, and convert it into therapy. All the other devices lose a lot of flow to making the mechanical device work, and patients either can't sustain the pressure for a long period of time, or if they do sustain the pressure, they can't sustain it for that 3 to 4 seconds. So the VibraPEP requires less flow for that patient to attain their therapeutic endpoints, which is holding a pressure between 10 and 20 centimeters of water pressure for 3 to 4 seconds. University of Chicago studied the 4 devices, our device, the Smiths Medical, the Monahan device, and the D.R. Burton device, and they looked at the flow required to meet these different pressures, and they were published. So as a tool to help you sell the VibraPEP, we are going to walk through the University of Chicago paper and replicate what they did in terms of looking at the different devices and show you the waveforms and show you the different pressures that are produced by the 4 different devices. So the setup that University of Chicago used is very similar to the setup I have here. We essentially have a flow meter that measures the flow going through the system, and we have a pressure gauge that's going to measure the pressure created by the flow, and we have a flow generator, which essentially is a CPAP machine, and we're going to set that at about 16 centimeters of water pressure. There's a little bit of compressed volume that's lost through the tubing, and that we're going to have a target of 16 centimeters. Okay, so in this setup we have an anesthesia bag, which is going to represent the compressed lung volume. We have the CPAP machine that's driving about 16 centimeters of water pressure. You can see the flow that we're getting here, about 34 liters per minute, and we have a target pressure of 15.3 centimeters, and that's with the VibraPEP on position number 1. As we rotate through the different settings, you can hear it change. And up on position number 5, you can see that we have a much lower flow required from that patient to still obtain 15.6-ish centimeters of water pressure. Okay, so we've hooked the VibraPEP up onto our system here. We're going to challenge it with 16 centimeters of water pressure on position number 1, and you can see that the flow required for the VibraPEP is only 32.6 liters per minute, and we're obtaining a 15.27 centimeters of water pressure. You can notice that our waveform is different than any of the other waveforms, which we'll show you in a moment. As we walk the device through the different settings up to position 5, you can see that our patient only needs to drive about 26 liters of flow. They're still getting their 15 centimeters of water pressure. And now our waveform, this is dynamic PEP, you can see that our waveform is drastically different with peaks across it. So here we have the Monahan Aerobica hooked up to the same situation. We have this set at the position in the most minus position. You can see that they require 63 liters of flow to barely reach 14 centimeters of water pressure. What that's telling me is we have a lot of leaking going on around here, and that we're expending a lot of that patient effort to make their mechanical device operate. As we move the system to their higher position, you can see the waveform doesn't change much at all. It's the same waveform. The VibraPep is the only device that actually can change that waveform. But you can see in their highest position for resistance, the patient still needs to blow 51 liters of flow to barely get 14.5 centimeters of water pressure. Here we have the Smiths Medical device. We're going to challenge it again with a 16 centimeter water pressure from the CPAP machine. You can see that in the least amount of resistance position, where the patient needs to drive about 52 liters of flow to reach about 14.5 centimeters of water pressure. Dialing it to the highest resistant level, you can see that the waveform does not change at all. It's still very synchronous, and they're still require that patient to drive about 38 liters of flow with about 15 centimeters of water pressure. Again, the waveform very synchronous. We have the DR Burton VPEP device hooked up again, and it only has 4 different positions on top. We have it in the least amount of pressure. You can see that the patient requires 70 liters of flow to generate only 13 centimeters of water pressure, barely being able to obtain a therapeutic pressure because it is such a mechanical leaky device. If we move the slider on top, it stops functioning. Let's try that again. I'll redo that for him. If we move that to that position, you can see that it stops working. So if we're kind and we have it in position, their position 3, they still need to drive 65 liters of flow to barely get 14 centimeters of water pressure. If the patient rotates the device to the side, it stops working, so it's very position dependent. When it was working, you can again see that the waveform, very synchronous. So here's the article, the variability in expiratory flow requirements among oscillatory positive expiratory pressure. This was written by the University of Chicago, and it was published in the Canadian Respiratory Therapy Journal. This is available at the vibrapep.com website, or your marketing team can provide this to you. What I would recommend is to read it from cover to cover and really understand exactly what they're saying. Because what they did is they looked at all 4 devices on the market and they challenged the devices with different flows, different pressures rather, and they calculated the flows that are required. And one of their conclusions says that the VibraPep device had the lowest steady state flow rate and differed significantly from the other devices for all pairwise comparisons to VibraPep. So they compared us to everybody, and we had the best flow requirements of all devices across all pressure. So if you understand this paper, you can really sell the device to your therapist. So to summarize, the VibraPep, because of our flow valve technology, allows you to maximize the patient's effort, meaning that they can obtain those pressures between 10 and 20 centimeters of water pressure with a minimum amount of patient effort. Also, we have the ability to change the way the waveform behaves so that you can treat a wider range of patient lung maladies. So if you have a patient that is a dry lung that needs more PEP, you'd use it on position 1, 2, or 3. If you have a patient that has tenacious secretions, you'd want to use it up in 3, 4, and 5 because of the way the waveform behaves. Again, we're the only device that can change the waveform, and we're the most efficient device in terms of converting the majority of that patient effort into therapy. I appreciate you taking the time to watch our video. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to me or Gay Kelly, our VP of Sales.